I just want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world, for our next Wield events. So Wield started, the germinations of it started about 3 years ago, and I think we've been sort of fully formed for about a year and a half now. We came out of some activities that sort of happened in the T1D space that culminated in a pair of publications. And so many of us that were on those publications wound up forming this group, organically. And so WIELD stands for Women, I'm going to get it wrong probably, Women Inspiring and Elevating Leadership in Diabetes. And so I am part of the education group. And what we try to do is do outreach to mostly graduate students and postdocs about various topics. And so we will be recording this, and we do have a few other videos and panels that have been recorded. So I encourage all of you to check those out if you are able to. We've done some great ones on leadership and other activities. And so what we wanted to do today was really talk to you guys and really have this as a lively sort of panel discussion. We thank you for those of you who have submitted questions beforehand, but if you have any questions for the participants, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I will be monitoring that. And for those of you that ask questions online, I've sort of culled them down to a handful of questions. We've only got now 55 minutes, so hopefully we can get through many of your questions, and we will go from there. And so without spending too much time, really the topic of discussion today was about women who are in leadership positions, mostly outside of traditional academic career paths, and what that has been like for all of us. And then with a special emphasis, because we are WIELD, on what those maybe special considerations are for women in those leadership positions. And so with that, I've asked all of us to just give a brief intro on who we are and what we do, and then we'll get into a little bit more about how we got where we were when we get into the next discussions. And I've also asked the panelists, I love icebreakers. Some people hate them, but I only like icebreakers when you've been able to prep for them. So I did prep our panelists for this. And I still don't have a great answer. But so name, current position, and the icebreaker would be, if you could time travel, where is the first place you would go? And so my name is Jessica Dunne. I currently work in global drug discovery at Novo Nordisk for type 1 diabetes. And if I could time travel, I gave this a lot of thought, but didn't really come up with a great answer. Where I think I would actually like to go is back to the 2016 election. And the reason I say that is because I actually was traveling over the 2016 election, and my daughter, who was 4 at the time, and I said, well, when I come home, we will have our first woman president. We all know that didn't happen. And when she came home, this little 4-year-old had said to me, how did he become president if he's so mean? And I wish I had, and the reason I say I would time travel back, wish I had done more in the months and weeks leading up to that to be more of an advocate, instead of just assuming that everything was going to be okay and people were going to see the reality of what was happening. So that's my answer, as maybe politically charged as it is. So I'll just go in terms of my who I see on the screen next. Ushma?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ushma Neill. I am the Vice President of Education at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and also editor-at-large for the Journal of Clinical Investigation. If I was going to time travel, that was a very tempting answer. Jessica, I actually brought my oldest son to the Javits Center in New York City for the Hillary Clinton victory party, and had to leave when it was turning in a different direction. But I also gave this a lot of thought. I've been spending a lot of time doing vaccine outreach of recent. And I think I would like to, this is an entirely selfish answer, I would love to go back to the mid-1950s when the polio vaccines were first released to the public, to see the jubilation and to see the populace so embracing vaccines, to be able to study what it was that was happening there and then, that we could translate, because I'm assuming with the time travel, you'd be able to come back to right now to be able to adopt some of the enthusiasm, policies, and outreach that we have problems with now.
Thank you. Tari?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Tari Suprapto. I am a colleague of Jessica's at Novo Nordisk, but my function is as one of the directors for search and evaluation, which is part of our business development efforts at Novo Nordisk. And we'll go a little bit more into what that actually means as we go through the discussion. For time travel, I am nowhere near as politically minded or as intellectually minded in my answer as my colleagues, because I'm clearly a vain and frivolous person, and so I actually chose to travel into the future. Travel is a big part of what I do, both for pleasure and for business, and I love it because I love seeing new places. It's just I hate the amount of time it actually takes to do it, although I do try to take joy in the journey. So I'd like to travel to a time in the future where teleportation is a real possibility and that you can go at the press of a button, providing I pass all security requirements and not and just be able to enjoy more time at the destination.
I love that answer. Jennifer?
The dishwasher.
Can't seem to hear you. You're not muted from me.
The Yumiko.
Does that work?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Sure. So I'm Jennifer Sargent, and I am the deputy editor at Nature Medicine. I head up a team of peer review editors who handle all of the NCDs except for cancer. And so essentially we cover most of the content of the journal, the exception of cancer and infectious diseases. I also run our team who looks at all of the global health and public health manuscripts at the journal. I'm a molecular scientist by training, but I do work exclusively in clinical editing. So if I could time travel, it's a bit of a cheesy answer, but I would actually go back to the Jurassic period. Mostly because the Stegosaurus is my favorite dinosaur. And I think that that's also the same period where the big sequoias were really around, or at least the ancestors of the giant sequoias that you see in today's day and age. And, I just think they're cool, really. And then I was thinking I should have a more political answer. And then I was thinking, well, 2016 is a good year because in the UK we had Brexit. And so I think being more of an advocate around then, we all, when the Brexit vote happened, I actually was at the Glastonbury Festival, and it was my birthday, and I woke up and thinking, this is great. We're going to stay in the EU. I'm going to have a great time at the festival today. It's my birthday, and it then sort of went disastrously wrong. And I think that at the time, as you were saying, Jess, that I wasn't enough of an advocate, and I think that we could have pushed a lot harder because a lot of us on the left thought that we were going to remain, and we really took that for granted. So I wish I hadn't done that.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Lots of the answers. Lots of, I think, advocacy in many of our answers, which I think you will see, hopefully, hear as a theme running through today's conversation. So, actually, Jen, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to talk about what your career path to your current position is, and what have been the challenges as a woman in reaching that current position. And sort of as a side question, why you chose graduate school, and what has been most helpful in terms of reaching your career aspirations. So lots of questions there, but sort of how you got where you are and why you chose the way you did, and any special sort of considerations along the way.
Sure. So I often find when people ask me that, and particularly when it's a group of students who are in the audience, as soon as I start talking, people start writing down like there's some kind of formula to be an editor. And I would say that, and we have another editor in our midst here, who's probably taken an entirely different path again. All of my colleagues have come to our profession through their own means, and so there's certainly no formula. Editorial is actually, I think, around 75 or 80% women, at least in professional editorial and in our group. So I would say becoming an editor from that perspective was not really an issue. I would say that the challenges that I face as a woman now are particularly in the clinical domain, where a lot of the people who I interact with and clinical trialists are men. And so that's where those challenges are. But for me, coming to my career, I was really interested in science in undergraduate, and I wanted to work in a lab. And then I knew that I wanted to, so I'm originally Australian, and I really wanted to leave Brisbane. And we had a visiting scientist come and join the lab, and she offered me a job in San Francisco. So I just took it. And, I was 20, 21, something like that. And 6 weeks later, just got on a plane and went to America by myself for the first time ever. And I just meant to stay for 1 year, and I was a UK citizen. So I thought, as an Australian, what we do is we just go to the UK and we work. But I ended up staying for 4 years in that lab, and then choosing to go to graduate school because I knew I wanted to do a PhD. And the place that I chose was all about Pseudomonas and biofilms, and I thought they were really cool. I ended up doing rotations and not actually staying in the lab that I had gone there to do. And then I thought that I was going to pursue an academic track. Things don't always turn out as they plan, but I had met an editor at a sort of a careers lunch at an immunology workshop when I was a postdoc. And then I realized that this particular person, I went through which journal they worked at, but essentially in chatting with them, they were saying, all they do is travel and they read papers, and they meet read all of the latest and greatest research without having to do any of the research. And I was like, wow, that sounds fantastic. I was always the person at a conference who would post my put my poster up, and then instead of sticking around to do my presentation, I would just bounce around and talk to everybody else about their science. So it's just this natural curiosity to be able to go and talk to people about what they're doing, to get that sense of excitement from other people about their own work when I was myself a despondent postdoc, was really exciting for me. And this job has been great. So I started as a reviews editor. I decided I wanted to do more forward-looking than back. I got a job at the Lancet, which was wonderful. I learned about clinical research. I learned about public health, and then had the opportunity to move to Nature Medicine, where they were changing scope from being a basic science and translational journal to into being a clinical journal with public health content. And so to bring those skills with me and to help build rather than be part of a 200-year-old institution was actually a really exciting opportunity. And so that's how I got to where I am. I think I've answered all the questions. There are a lot.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Tari, same question.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of go in chronological order because that'll kind of explain why I went to graduate school. So, I actually have always loved science since I was very young. I benefited from having parents. One was a physician, one was not a scientific academic, but she was an academic professor, and so education was always on the top of her list. And she was like, I don't care whether you're rich or poor, but you need to be educated because that's the one thing that people can't take away from you. So that really stuck with me. And she was one of the first female PhDs in Indonesia, which is where I'm originally from. And so it was sort of built into my consciousness that maybe that's where I should go. And even my dad's like, I don't know if you should be an MD, because I was contemplating med school too. But anyway, I always loved science. I ended up majoring in biology in undergrad. And because I was going to college in the US and I wanted to stay in the US for both educational and personal reasons, that grad school was a great way to stay in the country and actually, get one step closer to my goal. So I went to the Rockefeller University in New York in my 20s. Great time of my life to be there. And halfway through that PhD program, which was an excellent program, and my project was going well, so, but I was there 2 o'clock in the morning, and this one experiment just went awry. Basically, the rotor froze into the centrifuge axle. And so I couldn't get it out. And I had spent 2 days doing this prep, and I'm like, I just went home finally at 5 o'clock in the morning. My husband said, "Where have you been?" I'm like, "Not where you think I've been. It was not fun." And then a couple hours later, I finally had to wake up again. And I said, "I really wish I did not ever have to do this experiment ever again." And he said, "You need to reevaluate." And I'm sharing this because that was a wake-up moment that really taught me the value of self-evaluation, a really good, honest, hard look about, are you happy? Just because things are going relatively well. Are you happy? And that's when I started to look at all of the alternate career paths, which is why panels like this are so useful. I'm glad they're becoming more common, more frequently offered to those that just want to know what the options are. Because I had to do a lot of that on my own. And I know we'll talk a little later about resources and just the quantity and quality have changed. But I ended up doing an internship in the technology transfer office at my grad school. And this is the office that's responsible for identifying innovations that could potentially be partnered out so that they can actually reach the marketplace. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And that opened up the door for my actual post-PhD job. So I never did a postdoc. I knew that a postdoc would be a waste of my time and a waste of whoever was going to be funding and overseeing me. And I was like, let's just not do this. And so straight out of grad school, I had a job across the street at Sloan Kettering, Ushma. So I recognize some of the buildings behind you in your background. Great big office, learn massive amounts. And I like Jennifer, I love looking forward, like what's the next big thing? And I love being close to the science. I love being able to talk to the scientists. I'm so happy not doing it. And I have nothing but the utmost respect in those that do it. But then you also learn the business side of science, which to me was fascinating. And that's what kept me going. I stayed in the academic sector doing licensing, setting up research collaborations for over 15 years. And then I hit my glass ceiling, as in you can't go to a more senior position unless if you spent time in industry. And I was like, okay, well, let's go break through that glass ceiling. It took me a couple years to transition into the industry side of the equation. I started out actually in animal health. I was at Elanco Animal Health for 2 years. Massive learning experience, which is what I love and adore. And then Novo Nordisk recruited me. And so I've been with this company for 2.5 years. And it too has been a massive learning experience as we expanded into so many different diseases and modalities. And that's what I realized, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's like, today I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to meet someone new, and most likely both. Right. And Jessica knows this from having worked with me. It's what I thrive on. And occasionally I do want to hide and just recharge, but that's where it is. The challenge of being a woman, look, it is to this day, I think biotech and pharma is still very male dominated. Academic science too was male dominated. I had a lot of faculty clients, I do refer to them as clients, that were predominantly male. And I very quickly learned that how I was treated and spoken to was not a reflection of who I was. It was a reflection of who they were. So I figured, listen, as long as I'm bringing value to you, you should probably have a conversation with me. And those that didn't actually kind of learned the hard way. So I really just don't, I don't lead with the woman card. I don't lead with the woman of color card. I'm like, I'm just me. And most people actually don't even see that anymore once we get into the meat of the conversation. But yeah, that first reaction, it tells me a lot about the other person. And to me, knowledge is empowering. So yes, there will always be challenges, but I don't let that get me down. Right. And we just keep going. So
Thank you. Sorry, lots of lovely and good nuggets in there, and I've learned something new about you too today. So that was great. Ushma?
So I have a very similar origin story as the one you just heard. Child of Indian immigrants. My father was a physician, my mother an occupational therapist. So for those of you who are fellow children of immigrants or immigrants yourself, like oftentimes there's like 1, 2, 3 acceptable professions out there. So I was kind of always, my brother and I were always pushed towards becoming physicians. And I thought that I was on that track. And then I spent a summer internship at Carnegie Mellon when I was in high school that exposed me to engineering. And that just was so cool. And that combination with biology. So I went into undergrad at Northwestern as a biomedical engineer, thinking that I was still going to get the right kind of training to be pre-med. But I had also gotten into this program that paid me to do research. So I was free hands to the faculty there. And so I joined a lab when I was a sophomore and started doing research all through the summers. And lo and behold, I stayed. Northwestern made it really, really easy for me to combine my senior year with my first year in grad school. barely had to apply. They threw, a fellowship at me, and then I got the NSF GRFP, and it just kind of became this thing that I made this decision at age like 18 about what I was going to study. But I got my PhD by the time I was 24. So the world was kind of my oyster. I had always really wanted to live abroad. So I got a Marshall Fellowship, a Marshall Scholarship, and moved to the UK and was at London doing my postdoc at Imperial College. And it was effing awesome. Being in your 20s, just like, Tari was saying, being in your 20s in New York City. I mean, I'm in my 40s, still in New York City, having a good time, but being in my 20s in London was fantastic. And I really enjoyed my postdoc. I enjoyed all the travel and kind of getting a view of the US from abroad. But my visa ran out and had to move back to the States. And believe it or not, in the early 2000s, we were still reading paper journals. And I was reading Nature and saw a little ad in the back for a maternity leave coverage position at Nature Medicine in New York City, and interviewed for that, also interviewed at Nature Biotech. Nature Medicine offered me the job first, so I took that and was there. I was only supposed to be there for 6 months, ended up staying for 2 years, loved it. Had met someone at a Keystone meeting. As Jennifer was saying, you get to travel and go do all this cool stuff. And so I met somebody at a meeting, and 2 weeks later, he called me, and he was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Investigation. And the woman he had hired to be the executive editor left to go launch the Public Library of Science journals. So he was left without an executive editor, and we had just met. So 2 meetings later, I went from assistant editor to executive editor. I said yes. So I did that for 9 years. It was fantastic. I loved it. I don't know, maybe things have changed in the last couple of years, but being an editor is the most awesome job. I absolutely loved it. Cannot endorse it highly enough. It was completely accidental career for me, but it is not the best paying job in science. I had 3 children, was living in New York City. And so one of the connections that I had made from my time as an editor was a man named Craig Thompson, who I met when he was the director of the Cancer Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And he had just moved to Memorial Sloan Kettering to become the president and CEO here. And I ran into him at an event at the New York Academy of Sciences, and he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And if I am honest, part of it is that he also threw a lot of money at me. I didn't quite double my salary, but almost, coming on board as his chief of staff. So I did that for 4 years, grew a lot of gray hair, learned a lot about politics, operation, leadership, etc. But the scientist in me was somewhat bereft. I loved him, loved working with him, still continue to really think that he's a magnificent individual and leader. But I really wanted to get back to a job that was closer to science. So they created this position of vice president of education because it's a very complicated organization. 5 different graduate schools, some in partnership with Rockefeller and Weill Cornell, a large postdoc population, pipelines, et cetera. So I have any number of different titles as well around running women in science, diversity in science, all of our mental health kind of stuff for trainees facing. I travel a lot less now, but I also have 3 teenagers, which is its own job in and of itself. But then the last thing I want to answer is about being a woman. And so I actually write about this fairly frequently. So I'm just putting in the chat 2 of the first things that I wrote about my own experience with sexism in science. And so, as I mentioned, I was 24 when I got my PhD. I only did a 2-year postdoc because that was all the funding I had. So I started as an editor at age 27, turning 28. And you show up into these rooms of power where it's a lot of septuagenarian and octogenarian old dudes. And here's this 28-year-old that's coming in, and I'm vain and I'm honest about that. And you show up and people treat you a certain way when you look a certain way. And so I had any number of different encounters with people where I had to figure out how to keep my mouth shut and or how to develop sharp elbows and a witty response that would put people in their place Having said that, things change when you get gray hair, and I am fully embracing that. I love not being hit on nearly as much. So I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate everybody's candid answers and honesty here. And I wrote some things down just in sort of the themes that I heard all of you say. And, I think in terms of showing up as your authentic self, this wasn't exactly said, but I think this was a common theme. And in fact, I think I used these words when emailing the panelists this morning. I normally actually wear dresses even when I'm sitting at home, but it's one of these cold, dreary days here. And I'm in a t-shirt and a hoodie. And I was like, oh, I should probably change for this panel. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to. This is my authentic self in the moment. And this is what people are going to see. But I think, one of the things, just to build on what Ushma just said, is, I used to bite my tongue a lot too when I was younger. And now I don't. But I also am in a position where I don't have to, right? I'm far enough along in my career. I know where I am. And so, if you are somebody junior, I would say try to seek out somebody who's maybe a little bit more advanced in their career to help you with your voice, especially among these challenges. I know it helped tremendously for me. The other thing, I know this is probably a topic for a whole conversation, a whole seminar, is about imposter syndrome. I used to have a lot of it when I was younger, and I tell people I don't have it anymore. And the reason I don't have it is because I know what I know and I know what I don't know, and I'm not afraid to get to that point. And so I think there's this, and this also was something I sort of heard underlying a lot of what we all said, was this idea that you have to know everything. Don't be afraid to again, this is almost about your authenticity. Like, what is it you know and what is it you don't know? Be confident in what you know, and also be confident in what you don't know. And I think I heard a lot of like this, do what you love, right? Like whether or not there's expectations that you have put on yourself or other people have put on themselves. When I was in grad school back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the expected trajectory was academic science. And I just knew it wasn't for me. And so I had to carve out my own path because there wasn't a lot of support. And like Tari said, it's great that these conversations are happening. And if you look at the pipeline, not everybody can become an academic scientist because there just simply aren't enough positions. So figure it out what it is you love. And I think, what you heard from all of us is it's not a linear path, right? It's more of like a jungle gym, and embrace the jungle gym. And I think we also heard the where you are actually working is almost as important as the what you are, right? Make sure you have a life that's outside of your job. Like Ushma, I have 3 school-age children, and I say my 9 to 5 is my job, and then my 5 to 9 is my unpaid Uber driver. So just that is also important in terms of like where you are, what you're doing, making sure you have that time and space to do these other things. And then I think we also heard the idea of connections is really important, right? So I know that I'm at Novo because of who I knew. And so not to say that my qualifications, I'm not dismissing my qualifications, but the foot in the door is often, I think what we heard is often making those connections with other people. So I think just some lessons that I heard from the panel. And so we'll move on to maybe the, there's a couple of questions maybe that I'll combine more into one. I just got my context for those of us over 40. She just changed I have progressive context, and she just changed the prescription. I think it's making it worse. And so it says, maybe we'll go to this next one. And again, if there are questions, and please put them in the Q&A. For doctoral students looking for future jobs outside of academia, what are the best resources, and what key skills do you need outside of academia? And so maybe we'll start with this one with Tari.
So I had also shared with Jessica an actual list of various things, and we're not going to run through those. But when I was looking, and this book is still around, right? It was sort of like something like Life Outside the Ivory Tower, and the word was alternative careers, right? So, and I'll just be really honest. So this would have put me in 2001, right? But I'm pretty sure this book is still around. And that was like, each chapter was a particular career that required a scientific degree, but was not an actual bench a bench position, right? And that was what sort of really opened up my eyes. And I would very systematically actually look through my alumni directory at Rockefeller, which, you know, it's a prominent research institution with a lot of notable alumni. And I started to circle who was actually in the past. And one of them was grant writing, one was science writing, right? And so on and so forth. And that's how I was able to make the connection. So I very proactively reached out. Nowadays, you guys have so much out there. And one of my favorites, and I'll just make a plug for him and the episode that I record with him, it's called Once a Scientist. It's a podcast that you can access through Apple and Spotify. I think as of today, he has close to 80, if not over 80 episodes. And each episode is interviewing a singular person who has taken a path. And literally that 45 minutes to an hour is spent talking about what that path looked like and what led to those decisions. So you imagine you take each one of us around this panel and you give each of us an hour to talk, which we all probably could. And it's just fascinating. Yes, thanks, Ushma. So that's one of my favorite resources for those who are just starting to explore the options. And talk to as many people as you can, right? Honestly, we're on this panel because we all kind of like to talk about ourselves. Everybody does. That's just human nature. So, but ask with curiosity and not judgment, right? And without expecting a handout, because I'm giving you that little nubbin advice. Because if you say, I'm talking to you because I want a job like yours and hopefully you have one for me, I'm like, I'm automatically 75% turned off, if not more. But if you say, I'd really love to know more about your story and how you got there, I think there's a lot to learn. Fabulous. We can talk all day, right? So that's my share. The skills and qualities. So what I really learned, and because I work on the business side of biotech and pharma, is that people really like to build relationships with people that they like being around. And that's where being the well-rounded person, right? Yeah, be smart, be a domain, expert in whatever, right? But as you say, when you're authentic, right? When you exude good energy that make people feel good being around you, they will actually tell you way more than they ever would have, which too is quite empowering, but are also most likely to help you advance. So, and also some people, men and women have told me, it's like, what I really like about every time I see you is that it's not just like talking shop, but it's also like we get to talk about lots of other things, right? I have lots of other interests, and I'm not shy about sharing them. So that is key. And I know there's a feeling of frustration, like, how can I get there when I've had no experience, right? You've got to think about what's transferable, right? Are you analytical? Are you organized? Are you a good communicator, both verbally and in writing? So really think about that. Don't worry too much about what you don't have. Think about what you have today. I'll stop there.
I keep forgetting that our Novo computers are not touchscreen. I keep trying to go touch the mute button and it's not. Jennifer, the same question for you. Sort of the skills and how do you get to what are the best resources and what kind of skills have gotten you where you are? And I love, Tari, that your answer had a lot of soft skills, because I think that's understated a lot in the scientific world.
So I'm actually going to follow straight from Tari, and because you've really focused on something that I think is super important, which is the transferability of skills. Like, as I said, I'm a molecular researcher by trade. If you look at anything that I have done by formal training, it's all been very molecular science. And then if you looked at anything I did before undergraduate, I'd never touched biology in my life. I was all math and physics and music. When I was 15, I thought I was going to be a professional trombone player. It's probably better for everyone that didn't pan out that way. But so there is no one path, right? And I think the transferable skills and understanding, and I think having that general curiosity, which comes with doing something that you love and following a path that you really find interesting. And that natural curiosity, it means you don't have to work so hard at it. It's not that I'm encouraging you to be lazy, but if it's a natural fit, then that then speaks again to being your true and genuine self. In terms of sort of tangible resources for students and postdocs, one of the things that I found in academia was that all of the training that you're given, how to write your CV, all of this stuff is based on scientific training and training to be a PI. I don't like the term alternative careers because actually academia is an alternative career, right? It's something like 12 to 15% of people actually make it through to academia. And then, you know, it's survival of the fittest. It's a hard slog. And kudos to anyone who can do it. That's brilliant. But that is the alternative now. So a lot of people now is doing PhDs, not with the intention of actually going in and doing scientific training, even beyond the PhD, because it's all about learning skills, learning problem solving, and learning how to interact and communicate with people. Gone are the days when you could just sit in the lab and not talk to anyone or sit at your computer and be really isolated. Even in science, you're doing interdisciplinary work, you're talking to people, you're getting out there. And it is possible to be quite introverted and to do the job that I do. I'm exhausted at the end of every evening of a conference. I go back to my hotel room and I just like sit in the darkness. And that is how I need. But I also get a lot of energy from talking to people when I'm out and about at the conference, but it's also exhausting. I think as well, understanding and with the natural curiosity, at least as an editor, I'm a generalist. And you know, so when I go to a public health conference, I've got a lot of questions for people. I don't know all the methods necessarily. I need to know the context. I go to diabetes meetings, obesity meetings, cardiology, financing meetings for public health. So there's such a broad array that I never claim to know necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm an editorial expert. I can edit your paper, I can peer review it, no problem. Do all of that stuff in my sleep. But when I want to learn about your research, I'm going to ask you all of those questions. And so I think having the confidence to know that you don't know everything is a really, really important thing, and to not be embarrassed or ashamed. I think when I first started in clinical editing, I was quite shy in talking to people, and I felt that I needed to know what the answers are. But also, I'm talking to people at the cutting edge of research who are discovering new things. So how would I know what that answer is? And so I think building on that confidence for me was a really big thing. And understanding that the skills that I have were about problem solving, understanding, and being able to interact with people is really where I got to where I went, rather than studying in textbooks and knowing that I could recite a cardiology textbook before I went to a meeting, because that doesn't get me very far. I don't know if that was sort of what you're looking for there, but yeah.
That was a great answer. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And Ushma, same question for you.
Sure. So being still in an academic research institute, I think for any grad students or postdocs who are listening, who are trying to do that kind of career exploration, you know, I have someone on my team who's the associate director of career and professional development. Her whole job, the whole day, is putting on and planning events to expose people to all kinds of careers and opportunities, working with people one-on-one on their LinkedIn, on their CV, whether it be an industry CV, an academic CV, how to talk about things, how to negotiate, conflict resolution, et cetera, and setting people up for those kinds of informational interviews that Tari was talking about. So if your institution doesn't have one, so I know, like, at least in New York City, this is now kind of considered an absolute necessity in terms of being competitive for students, because the students, prospective students, now know to ask for this. So there's an office like this at Rockefeller, at Weill Cornell, at MSK, NYU, Columbia, Mount Sinai, Einstein, Cold Spring Harbor. So these people exist out there. And if they don't at your institution, and you are brother and sister with an institution across the street, go there. Or the postdoc office, the dean of your graduate school. This is their job. Remember that your success is their success. The last thing that we want on reporting on outcomes is not known or unemployed. Like, it is our job to prepare you, it's your PI's job to prepare you scientifically. Exactly what Jennifer was saying. During graduate school and postdocs, you're an inch wide and a mile deep. But it's my job to prepare you to be an inch deep and a mile wide around communication, grantsmanship, talking to a global audience, figuring out how to both get the mentoring you need as well as becoming a mentor, all of those other kinds of skills. That's what our team is here to help support and do. I've had conversation lessons with someone, like somebody who really was going out on the job market and was finding it. Sorry, I'm seeing that my internet connection's unstable. I hope you can hear me. Somebody who came to my office and didn't really know how to strike up a conversation with people. This was somebody who was not American born and bred and wasn't like a born extrovert like I am. We spent 3 different sessions just figuring out, like, I would be quiet and let her come up with questions to ask me, things that she saw in my office, et cetera. So there are people like me at every single one of your institutions. Or if you see a faculty member that you know has a connection with like Novo Nordisk or here, hey, remember to get in touch with both Jessica and Tari, right? So people who are in those industries you can reach out to, as Tari was saying, like around, I'm really interested in your path. There's lots of those kinds of means by which you can find that and figure out these skills and how they convert. And beyond that, if my story was at all informative, just be open to opportunities that are put in your path.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, Jennifer, I'm glad you brought up the introversion, because I was afraid that I know Tari, I know Tari's an extrovert, but also knew that you were more on the introverted side. And I was hoping that people would understand that, I'm also like Ushma and Tari, like very extreme on that sort of end of things. But I'm glad you brought up the introversion, because I think, right, there are special challenges for people who are not like me. But, to your point, like if this is something that interests you, and there are lots of other mechanisms, right? Especially in today's world, if you don't want to go talk to that person, at the conference, like drop them an email or connect with them on LinkedIn. I love using LinkedIn. I tell young trainees to use it all the time. I just spoke to a young woman today who was like, I'm thinking about a career change. And I'm like, I'm not in the career you want to change to, but she knew I knew a lot of people. So I was like, okay, I'm going to connect you to X, Y, and Z, right? So use that. And I know, Ushma, we'll get to this in a second, this idea of like mentorship and allies too is wonderful. And then I'll just sort of end on, I think some of the best advice that I think we heard again throughout all of this is my grad school advisor said that all a PhD shows is that you have the opportunity or the ability to learn at a high level, right? So what you're working on today is more likely than not what you're going to be working on 20, 30 years. Like Ushma, like you, I'm a biomedical engineer by training too. I do zero like engineering these days. So, all right, we're going to end. We've got 2 more questions, and I don't see yet any questions in the chat, but I love this question. This was submitted to us by one of the participants. What's your favorite memory of women empowerment in your career? Ushma, we'll start with you.
So I was thinking about this and wasn't exactly sure how to respond to this, because I can think of so many really wonderful moments, but there was something that I think was most impactful to me. And this is going to sound so egotistical to bring up, but I'm going to tell the story anyways. One of my colleagues, with whom I actually write an enormous number of pieces in the lay press, the last one was in the Harvard Business Review on how to write a personal statement, right? But she, for 22 years, was the director of the Tri-I MD PhD program. And that is supported through a T32. And we were undergoing the site visit. I'm on the executive committee, et cetera. So we're sitting there in this room full of site visitors and our fellow leaders of the Tri-I MD PhD program. And she and I were the only women in the room. I'm so used to this. She's so used to this. It wasn't a thing, right? But everybody is talking about, and I mean no disrespect to the man who was the academic head of the MD PhD program, but everybody was talking about him and his leadership and this, that, and the other. And when it was my turn to talk, I also mentioned her name and said, and she's a real resource to the students and this, that, and the other. Afterwards, she came to talk to me and said, do you know that in 22 years, that's the first time my name has been brought up in that meeting? I didn't do it on purpose. I did it because she deserved the recognition. She did so much of the work. And her sitting there and telling me that that was meaningful to her flipped a switch in me to start doing that more often, because I had reached the point in my career where I could be the sponsor. I could be the person. So the difference between like leader, mentor, sponsor, boss, etc. So I could be the person who was saying people's names in meetings and putting them up for awards and that thing where, you repeat something that somebody else said, like, as Tari said, this was a really great idea that this person had. So trying to do that from a women empowerment, I didn't realize I did it. I'm glad I did. And I'm glad that it was meaningful to somebody else. And now I notice when everybody else does it, and I, thank them for it afterwards, whether or not they've been mentioning my name. But I'm trying to make sure that that's something that we're promulgating.
I love that. Jennifer, same question.
So I think for me, I've been on the receiving end of that in a couple of different ways. And I'm thinking most notably one project in two different meetings that we'd had, one in London, one in Boston. And it was a big global health project that I was working on in my previous job. And it was the good and the great of global health. So I've walked into the room. I'm a very new editor, very new to public health, very new to NCDs and, work in poverty. And I was so in awe of all the people in the room, mostly old white men, that I actually didn't realize I was sitting next to Chelsea Clinton at the time in the first meeting. So that was like, whoa. But also in this meeting, as the editor, it's my job to corral the conversation. And it's my job to say, well, this is what the Lancet wants to see in this project, and to steer the group, which, as the youngest person in the room by a lot, and the shortest person by a lot, was quite difficult for me to do. And I kept trying to challenge the leader, who was a cardiologist, a very well-known institution, and he kept talking over me. And I was enormously frustrated, and I had something like burning that I absolutely had to say. They were going way off path, and you could tell. And every time and he would just cut me off. And this piece of paper was getting passed around the U-shaped table, and it came to me and it had my name on it. And I opened it up and it just said, "You've got this. You're a strong woman. You are the editor and you can lead the group." And I was like, and I looked around and I saw who had done, and it was a hematologist from Tanzania. And she had said, like, just, you can't take shit from this person. And and then I was like, actually, you know what? She's right. And I think I needed somebody else to believe in me for me to believe in myself. And there were a couple of occasions in this, we would meet in various parts of the world and for some reason, at the beginning of every meeting, I had the same struggle. And at the beginning of every meeting, I would look at the women in the room and they would all just like, just go for it. And we were all smiling to ourselves, and I would just go for it. And it worked out really well. And so, being on the receiving end of that, this she for she, and supporting other women in the room. And I try to do that now with more junior colleagues, to speak for the person who doesn't have the voice, or to elevate that person who doesn't have the voice, to be on the receiving end of that, and to understand what a powerful effect that can have. And now, as Ushma was saying, to be able to do that for other people, and understanding the power of what it is to have my position, is a really important thing. And the fact that most of my office is actually women, I think is a really powerful thing as well. Although I think that's also why, as Ushma is saying, that it's a particularly poorly paid profession. But that's like a whole other story.
Thank you, Jennifer. Tari, same question.
So I'd like to address that slightly in two parts, because there's as to Jennifer's point, there's the giving and the receiving, right? I think people in positions like ours have the ability to do both, right? And I do actively mentor as part of my giving back, right? For all of the advice, support, guidance, mentoring that I received. And so every time someone that I mentor, either who actually officially interned with me or entered into an official mentoring capacity, or even just someone who was able to come up to me and be like, "I just love to talk to you," and I kind of automatically fold them in, especially if we get along. And when they succeed, when they get to that next point of that career, or they get that big job that they were hoping for, I mean, those all fall into favorite moments, right? Because they're different, right? And so, but helping people minimize or decrease their struggle and really get to where they want to be, it's really, really meaningful. But I would probably say my favorite memory of empowerment, especially for myself as a woman, and it was given to me by a woman, was the boss that I had when I was in the Rockefeller Tech Transfer office. She's the one that gave me the internship that got my foot in the door to make that first big leap. But the really seminal moment, and we don't talk about this often enough, right, is that as women, we have that other side of us, which is the family, right? Whether you are a birth mother, an adoptive mother, or even if you're, an animal mother, right? It takes time, it takes commitment, and we do it because we have a passion for it. And it's not always easy to get that work-life balance for your own mental health and enjoyment. So I was faced at a major crossroads because we were going to relocate to California from New York City. And I was also in my third trimester of my first pregnancy. And I was super stressed out. I got to go find a new job. I'm about to have this baby and I'm going to move to a new town where I know nobody, right? And I had lived in New York for 12 years. And my boss caught me crying in the hallway and she was like, get in my office already. And she's like, what's going on? So I just went, blah. And she was like, okay, I can make one piece of this easier for you. She was like, I was thinking about this anyway. So my boss actually worked remotely 2 days a week. And this was back in the early 2000s. There was no COVID. There was no, no Zoom, no Teams, right? It wasn't common, right? The whole work from home, work remotely thing. Certainly not in academia, right? In an academic institution. And she said, look, you do not want to go to a new town with a new baby and look for a new job. And I get that. So how about I just keep you on part-time and you work remotely? She was like, it's winter right now. You shouldn't even be commuting in. So let's give this a go, right? So I basically called in, used VPNs and whatnot. Those were there back then. And that's why I've always been really comfortable being a remote worker and actually prefer it. But I was doing it way before it was as common as it is now. But it enabled me and it empowered me to be both, to have the career and have the family. Was I perfect at all of it? Oh, dear goodness, no. But I was able to have it all, and I still do. I don't have the gap in my resume that a lot of women have struggled with that try to come back into the workplace. And again, we all make our choices for very personal and powerful reasons, right? But that struggle is real. And so for those of us who are able to just smooth the way by being flexible and creative and offer more solutions than problems, let's do it, because that was so pivotal for me, right? In my career path.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks to everybody. I was trying to read the Q&A too. So we're coming up on time, but I loved all of your stories. And one of the things I heard last week, I don't even remember where, was this idea that when we give credit to somebody else, it actually minimizes our contributions. And so for those of us, which is actually a false narrative, right? It actually, I think, enhances our contributions when we are able to recognize others. So for those of you that are more junior, find those people in your network who will maximize your impact, who will maximize your contributions. And I was at my last high school reunion a few years ago, and the principal, who was a teacher back when I was in high school, said, what would you go back and tell your 16-year-old self? I went to an all-girls school, and I said, I would tell my 16-year-old self that none of this bullshit is worth it. And what I mean is, like, all the girl infighting, like, find your sisters, find your sisterhood, and connect with them, because it is so incredibly important. And not to minimize, I know we have a couple of men on here, the importance of mentors and allies. And it is so important to have male allies, right? It's to the point that a few of our panelists make, like, if you have that voice, use it for the people that don't have that voice, right? So whatever that means. I think I read this book a few years ago when I was at J&J. I forget the title of it, but talked about headwinds and tailwinds that we all have in our careers. And so, like, I have a lot of tailwinds, right? My biggest headwind is that I'm a woman, but I have a lot of other tailwinds. So use my other tailwinds to help, push other people forward. And so find the people in your network that are willing to do that for you. I think that's a lot of what we heard. And I had a pretty major moment that I don't think we have time to share, but it was actually the male allies that helped carry me through, because they were able to, because it was a bunch of men coming after me, and they were able to finally step up and be like, shut them down, whereas a bunch of women, they weren't listening to women, right? That was part of the issue. So find those allies wherever you are. So I know we're coming up to time. I want to be very cognizant of, and I was just trying to look at the Q&A, but I don't know. And so we will try to, there's a couple of comments and questions about different resources. We will try to, hopefully we can capture them and then send them to all the meeting participants. And maybe I'll just give all of our last participants a 30-second final word of advice. Tari, we'll start with you.
I think I've been doing little nuggets of advice throughout. But it's really about do understand that your success lies with you, and it means, and if really my advice that I give to all of my mentees and peers is like, do you have directionality in your path? Do you know what's truly going to make you happy? What's going to make you jump out of bed in the morning and be like, hello world, what you got for me today? Right? In a happy tone of voice, right? And you won't get that every day, but if it's the majority of days, it's a win. But please be honest with yourself. And if you don't even know where to start, what questions to ask yourself, go to the people like Ushma was saying, or even take a self-assessment tool. There's tons of them out there, right? Knowing your strengths, your predispositions, and what you need in order to feel fulfilled. It's so important. I can't even even tell you enough, because we're just giving you examples, but it's your life to live, and only you can live it.
Love that. Ushma?
I was trying to think of like what pearl I could leave you with, and that's 3 tiny things, 2 very, very short and 1 slightly longer. Our family has 2 mottos that we live by. 1, it's more fun to have fun. 2, always choose awesome. Okay. So those are very easy to live by, right? The third kind of silly one is that my New Year's resolution every single year is to eat more mango, because everybody wins if you eat more mango. And if you don't meet your New Year's resolution, then you can try harder the next year, right? Okay. But the real kind of earnest advice that I would give actually comes from the head of neuroimmunology at Yale, this guy, David Hafler. I was chatting with him at a meeting when he was chair, and he was he was doing this, he was doing that, he was hosting a reception, he was making sure and I was like, oh my God, you must be so excited for when this is over and you won't be so busy. And he looked at me and he said, busy is a state of mind. I'm not busy. I make time for the things that I want to do, that I need to do, and that I want to do. And so why spin your wheels and waste your time over this like fretting about being busy? You know how to prioritize. I know how to prioritize. We'll get it done. We'll figure it out. Like being worried and spending all of this effort around busyness is a waste of time. And I've tried to adopt that. And I think that has worked for me. I'll get it done. It'll be fine.
Love it. All right, Jennifer, you get the last word.
Why? That's a lot of pressure. We've talked a lot about being your authentic self. And we've talked a lot about pathways, directionality and pathways. And I think it's really important to remember that everyone has a unique pathway, and you have to go with what's right for you. It's not so different from Tari's nugget advice there, but I think it's, like I said, I have in the past gone to a lot of, and presented and talked about my career path, and people stop looking, stop listening, and just start writing down verbatim what I'm saying. What are the paths to becoming an editor? And there is no one pathway. Everyone comes from a different background. Everyone has different interests. And I think you need to believe in yourself, and you need to trust yourself. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in my career is hanging on to something for too long, because I felt that that's what the expectation was, that someone else has said, this is the path that you're taking. And I've really agonized over that. It's, a lot of anxiety with that, a lot of unhappiness, and staying in a path for longer than I needed to be, and not understanding that I could create my own path, which would be happier and more successful. So it is about ownership of your path, but also understanding that your path is not the same as the person who's sitting next to you, and to just believe and trust in yourself. And sometimes, we talk a lot about moving forward and being successful, but we also have to recognize that we're human. And it's okay to sit back sometimes and just go, you know what? Today's not the day. Today's not the day I'm going to break through the barrier. but maybe I'll sit and I'll rest and I'll think about it, and maybe I'll do that tomorrow. So I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be these, very successful Barbie creatures. And I think that sometimes we just have to recognize that we're human.
I love it. That was a great last word to end on, Jennifer. So I just want to thank my panelists. It was great I loved this. I hope our participants did as well. So thank you for sharing your stories. And I certainly learned a bit more about all of you. So thank you everyone for joining. And again, we'll try to send those links along. All right. Take care.